Hey everyone, before we get going, if you find the information in this video has helped you or you think it will help someone else, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share with those who are looking for more apologetics with bite, unaffected by the twitteries of niceness culture. Don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified when new videos drop, and be sure to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and X for more insights and to potentially chat with me on a live panel. If you're one of those who disagrees with what I brought up, or just to generally want to do something other than hate watch finally, scan the QR code and send me an email to get a discussion set up. And now, without further ado, so we actually do have a non-Latter-day Saint, it looks like on the panel here with WTF. So for TikTok purposes, are you over the age of 18?
Oh, yeah, I'm 30 years old.
Right on. And what's your current faith?
Christian.
Any particular flavor?
Now I'll try not to disclose it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so the question that I did see is how can you say that the church fell into apostasy when the Dead Sea Scrolls proved the texts are the same? I would push back on that and say when you actually look at the text compared to, like, say, for instance, what was printed in the King James Version, it is actually pretty different. You could say the Great Isaiah Scroll, maybe, but at least Deuteronomy and 1st and 2nd Samuel are different as well.
But in both, in Deuteronomy, we can agree, which is an important thing, that it says on how to base whether a prophet is really a prophet or not, right?
I would disagree. Because if we did that, we'd have to toss the entire Bible.
And why is that?
Well, I mean, if we were to take a strict approach to, like, and I'm guessing. Well, let me ask you this: what verse are you referring to in Deuteronomy?
Where you judge a prophet based on whether or not what they say comes true.
What's the verse?
On top of my head, I'm not too sure. I got it written down somewhere, but
Okay. So let me ask you this then: if there, so basically on your understanding, if a prophet makes a prophecy and a single prophecy does not come true, they're no longer a prophet, right?
yeah.
Okay. Well, there are a few examples that come to mind that, again, if we were to use that strict of a standard, again, we'd have to toss out the entire Bible. So, for instance, let's probably use what would be the easiest layup here. Jonah, right? By that standard, Jonah would be considered a false prophet if we were to read what the accounts in Jonah chapters 3 and 4.
But doesn't your church withhold to Deuteronomy?
Sorry, had to give my baby's toys back. We would say that it is scripture, but the scripture that you were probably referring to in Deuteronomy, we would not say is the test of a prophet.
But it said, let me pull it up real quick just so I can quote it. Maybe we're thinking of different ones. Sorry, I just got off work. I wasn't really even ready to do this.
No, you're good. That's fine.
Sorry, just 1 second. So I know, like Nephi, he claimed that like pretty much Jesus would be born in Jerusalem.
Nephi didn't. No. I think the scripture you're thinking of is in a different book, in the Book of Mormon. But it says at Jerusalem, the land of our fathers. So it'd be the same type of principle as, like, saying, like, I'm from Seattle, but in actuality I'm from Everett, which is like an hour north of Seattle. But no one really knows where Everett is unless you're from the area.
Yeah, but Bethlehem is like a whole different city.
Yeah, but it would be within the same county. It's only 6 miles away from Jerusalem.
But I don't think that people in that area now or historically would have said that.
In the ancient, there's actually a historical source that would actually point to Bethlehem being in the land of Jerusalem. And that is something that has actually been shown through historical scholarship. And so when you're talking, so when someone who is in the Western Hemisphere, and they kind of have an idea about Jerusalem because that's where their ancestors came from, but then they have, but they don't necessarily know where any surrounding cities about. It's kind of that same type of principle where I say I'm from Seattle, but I'm not actually from the city of Seattle. I'm from the Seattle area. So, and that would mean, like, for instance, if I lived in Everett, which is the city an hour north of Seattle, if that makes sense. So it's that same type of principle. So Bethlehem, being only 6 miles away from Jerusalem, would be considered part of the land of Jerusalem.
See, I know, like, that's a lot of times that's like LDS. That's their like talking point.
No, it's
but
not.
I
This
don't
is
think
actually historical
anyone.
scholarship that has actually pointed that out.
Is there references for that?
Yeah, let me actually pull up some here. Let's see here. Sorry, I have to dig through all my files. Sometimes searching doesn't necessarily help.
And to kind of go along this,
Yeah.
while he's pulling that up, I live in Minnesota, and the Mall of America is described to be in Minneapolis, whereas the actual address is in Bloomington.
Bloomington, yep.
Yep, which is a subdivision of Minneapolis.
Right. My wife grew up in Minnesota, so I know that phrase very well. But yeah, like whenever we were introduced to ourselves, I mean, she grew up in a small town about an hour and a half north of the cities. And so when, she would often say like, "Oh yeah, I'm from Minnesota, but I'm not really from the city." So like, okay, so she had to make that clarification every time. But it's that same type of here. So like we have some historical evidence. So like from W.F. Albright, who showcased the Armana letters, which is dated back to the 14th century BC. It contains references to the land of Jerusalem and specifically mention a town of the land of Jerusalem, Bethlehem by name. Okay. We have the satellite settlement model, which is from the 7th century BC-ish, that indicate that like cities like Bethlehem were part of the land of Jerusalem. This would have been around the time when the Book of Mormon actually started. So this is not that uncommon with the ancient world, that if there are surrounding cities or settlements within a certain distance of a major city, like a capital city, it is considered to be part of the land of that city.
So, if I could show scholarly work that this says that's not the case, and that you can't call them two things the same, how would you reconcile that?
How old is the scholarship? Because the scholar that I mentioned, his scholarship was within the last 5 years.
Yeah, same. It's actually a guy that was in a documentary 3 years ago.
Are you sure, or is that just a documentary that was uploaded like YouTube 3 years ago?
Yeah.
So it was uploaded to YouTube 3 years ago? Because that could have been something that was produced like 15, 20 years ago, admittedly.
But I did find a verse in Deuteronomy. It was Deuteronomy, let's see, verse 21, Deuteronomy 18:21.
Okay, I figured that was the verse that you were looking at here. So here's like what version are you reading out of?
This is NLT.
Okay. I
This
like
is what popped up first.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I have the New Revised Standard version up, mainly because it uses the most ancient documents available. So based on what it says here, it says, "You may say to yourself, how can we recognize a word that the Lord has not spoken? If a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, but that thing does not take place or prove true, it is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Do not be frightened by it." It doesn't say that the person who makes the prophecy is no longer a prophet or was never a prophet. In fact, it still refers to that individual as a prophet.
Yeah, but if a prophet speaks prophecy without the authority, then you need not to fear them, but you need not to trust them as
Well,
well.
it just says that the prophet spoke it presumptuously, to not be afraid of that particular prophecy because they didn't actually prophesy in that instance. That doesn't mean that that person is not a prophet.
But then if you read in Deuteronomy 18:20, it says, "But any prophet who falsely claims to speak in my name, or who speaks in the name of another god, must die."
Right. So in the case of, for instance, well, let's read what it actually says in verse 20. But any prophet who proceeds to speak in my name a word that I have not commanded, the prophet to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. So this one is primarily speaking to those who would try to prophesy to Israel in the name of another god to go to another god. And we have Netzarim saying, well, Joseph Smith did die, but yes, so did Moses, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel.
But why
Like,
did Moses die though in the way he did? Because he disobeyed God.
well, no, he passed away several years after he
Once he
exhibited that
fulfilled his
pride.
agreement.
Well,
Once he
but
led his people to the promised land, land
yeah,
of.
but here's another thing though, is that he was actually told that he would lead his people into the promised land, not just to it.
Yeah,
But
but he would
but
not pass. He would die outside it.
Yeah, but the thing is, because that prophecy was not fulfilled, that would make him a false prophet, according to your interpretation of what it says here in Deuteronomy 20.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be a false prophet, but it would be a prophet that isn't really reliable. Just like
So
in, I
Moses
can't
isn't
remember what book,
reliable
like
then.
Samuel. Well, I'd say that he was reliable until he wasn't, and you
When
can say
when
the
when was he
same
no
about
longer
Joseph Smith
reliable?
when he started disobeying God.
Okay, but he already got his punishment for that by not being allowed to enter into the promised land. That doesn't mean he was no longer reliable or no longer a prophet. Like, where do we get any indication that Moses was somehow now unreliable because of the sin he exhibited because of his pride? Where do we get that? Where do we
It's
see
just
that?
like the nature of the words.
Well, no. It would say pretty much that Moses fell from his prophetic mantle. Don't you think?
Well, it's just like the prophets that they kept telling the kings what they wanted to hear, and then he had to, like, I'm trying to think of the exact verse because I know the Bible's so
If
long.
you're talking about Balaam, he was still a prophet, even though he was telling the king what he wanted to hear. He prophesied, good tidings to Israel. When Balak wanted him to curse Israel, but he didn't. In fact, he had to granted he had to be convinced by God making his donkey speak, but that's beside the point. The issue here though is that, again, these verses do not say that anyone that speaks a false prophecy is, one, no longer a prophet, nor is it nor were they ever a prophet to begin with, or that they fell from being a prophet. It gives leeway for a prophet to still be human and to make mistakes.
When it says that they must die.
Yeah, it says that those that that attempt to try to bring people to other gods should be put to death.
What I'm reading says, "Who speaks in my name, or who falsely claims to speak in my name, or who speaks in the name of another
So
god."
this is where, yeah. So if they speak in the name of other gods, meaning they don't speak in the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel, which means they speak
Or
in,
they
say, the god
falsely
of
claim to
Moab.
speak in
They
their.
speak in the name of Chemosh, the god of Moab.
Yeah, but for instance, if Joseph Smith says, like, God has spoken to me, and he says, in this generation we will build a church and a state, and then it doesn't happen,
So
that's him
that's
falsely
not that wasn't
claiming
a
to speak in
prophecy.
his
That was a
name.
command. That wasn't a prophecy. That was a commandment.
Oh, that was 100% a
It
prophecy,
wasn't a
and
prophecy. You go back
even
and actually
early.
read what it says. That was a commandment. That wasn't a prophecy.
Yeah, but even early Mormon members spoke about that, and they were having trouble reconciling that. And they, even all the way until their deathbed, they were saying,
Yeah, and
if he
well,
said
let
it,
me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Okay, because this is actually a perfect example, right? Going back to Jonah, right? What? So by this standard, if we were to look at Deuteronomy 18 here, then Jonah would be considered a false prophet by that same metric. And we would have an entire book that is dedicated to that false prophet.
that very well could be.
Okay, so wait, are you suggesting that you think Jonah was a false prophet?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I don't know enough about it to determine whether it is.
Okay,
or not.
so do you remember the story of Jonah?
Off the top of my head, not too much.
Okay, so this is where so Jonah was the prophet who was told to go preach to Nineveh, to prophesy to Nineveh, and then ran away, got thrown into the belly of a giant fish, and then spit up, and then actually went there. So here's the thing. So just reading Jonah chapter 3, right? This is after he got spit out of the fish. He said, "Get up, go." The Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, "Get up, go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it the message that I tell you." So Jonah set out and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly large city, a 3 days walk across. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's walk, and he cried out, 40 days more, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God, and they proclaimed a fast, and everyone, small and great, put on sackcloth. So here's the thing. The prophecy was that in 40 days, Nineveh would be destroyed. Now, was Nineveh destroyed in those 40 days?
Honestly, I don't know too much about that book, but people in the comments are saying that it did come true.
Well, the qualifier here is that it would be destroyed within 40 days, not 40 years, is 40 days from the time that Jonah spoke.
So are you saying he's a false prophet?
According to the standard that you presented in Deuteronomy 18, he would have to be.
Well, I'm just reading the Bible.
Yeah, so am I.
So you're saying it makes him a false prophet?
According to the standard that you set forth of what you're eisegeting Deuteronomy 18 to be.
So then would that make Joseph Smith a false prophet? According to my standard.
According to your standard, sure. But again, we would have to apply that same standard to the biblical text and to the biblical prophets. So that would make Jonah a false prophet. That would make Jeremiah a false prophet. That would make Isaiah a false prophet. That would make Moses a false prophet. And by that same exact standard, again, it's not our standard, it's yours, it would even make Jesus a false prophet.
Well, how would it make Isaiah a false prophet?
There's a lot of the prophecies that many people were, especially later on, attributing to Jesus that Jesus didn't actually fulfill. Jesus was never called Emmanuel, for instance.
So then, because I know, like LDS members, you guys have a lot of modern day prophets. Whenever you guys have like the apostles,
right? Which is
why
that strict standard of Deuteronomy 18 is not our standard of determining who is and is not a true prophet of God.
That's my next question. What is your guys' standard then?
What Jesus said in Matthew 7.
Well, why does that outrank Deuteronomy?
Well, one, it comes from Jesus Christ himself. Secondly, it is actually a lot clearer than what you're trying to interpret Deuteronomy 18 to be. Because Deuteronomy 18 does not say what you're trying to make it say. It doesn't say that a prophet who speaks in the name of Yahweh, who speaks in the name of the God of Israel, is all of a sudden no longer a prophet. In fact, Deuteronomy 18:22 still calls that individual a prophet. They're still a prophet, even if they speak presumptuously.
No, that was Matthew what? I'm sorry.
Matthew chapter 7.
Verse 15 to 20?
I believe so, yeah.
So, like, pretty much, like, by their fruits you'll recognize them?
Yeah, by their fruits you shall know them. And so this
So-
is this is not saying that that there should be no more prophets or prophecy or anything like that, but that the fruits of said prophets are how you're going to judge. You cannot get a good fruit from a bad tree, nor bad fruit from a good tree. Right?
So I understand. I think that's a good test. So I think that, like, if you put that in the test of Joseph Smith, though, he got kicked out of a state. He got murdered while broke. He didn't fulfill his promises, commandments, or prophecies, however you claim them. Wouldn't that be like bad fruits?
No, not at all. Especially since none of what you said is accurate.
It is accurate, though.
Okay,
He
so
did get
let's
murdered.
go down the list that you just said. So what was the first thing that you said, and we can
He
go
got kicked out of the state.
Okay, so did the saints of the ancient church, and so did Jesus Christ out of Galilee.
Yeah, but it's part of the prophet that Jesus would die.
No, Jesus
He's
got kicked
supposed
out
to
of
be-
Galilee. Jesus got kicked out of Galilee because of what he said in the synagogue. He got kicked out of Nazareth because of what he said in the synagogues there. Does that mean that he has bad fruit?
But it's part of the prophecy that people aren't really going to like him. People are going
Right,
to
and
disagree.
it's the
by
same
claiming
thing with
Messiah.
Joseph, and it's the same thing with Joseph Smith. But that's the thing, is that if you're going to apply it to Joseph, you need to be willing to apply it to also the biblical text.
There's just one big difference, though.
There isn't really.
There is. You're talking about the prophecy of the coming of God versus no prophecy
okay, so
of Joseph Smith.
where's the prophecy that says that Jesus will be kicked out of his hometown of Nazareth?
It said that he would come. I don't remember the exact verse, but there's verses that speak about how people won't necessarily like him. I mean, how
right. So
there's gonna be division because of it.
but here's the thing, is that the circumstance that we're providing is that you're exhibiting a double standard here, because you're willing to apply a standard to Joseph Smith that you're not willing to apply to anything within the biblical text. That's the issue that I'm having. And so unless you're willing to apply that same standard, you can't really say that you're being fair when it comes to your judgments of Joseph Smith and examining his fruits. So just because Joseph and the saints were kicked out of Missouri and Ohio and Illinois doesn't mean that that's an example of bad fruit. I mean, and that's the issue here. I mean, we see the same thing not just with Jesus Christ, but we also see that with the ancient Hebrews being kicked out and driven all over the place.
Lon, what if I make an extra point on that? He's gone. Okay. Yeah, no, I'd also include the fact that Jesus condemned the Jews for unaliving various prophets throughout history, but did not necessarily confirm which ones he was talking about. So there were prophets that aren't written about in the Bible that were unalived by the hands of the Jews, regardless of their truthfulness as prophets.
And another thing that I wrote in the comments is that even Adam was kicked out of a place, and that was because of him going against God. And so my question is, was that something that would make him less of a prophet than he is ascribed to be in the Bible?
I think there's a big difference between Jesus being the Messiah, God sent in flesh, versus someone claiming they're a prophet.
Huge difference, but that doesn't preclude the
That's where I think the double standard doesn't exist, because we're comparing apples and oranges.
No, we're comparing other prophets to one prophet.
We're comparing
It's just an
Messiah.
example, one portion of that example. We're not.
But if any of the
we're
other
not-
prophets were they
We're
Messiahs?
not constraining our argument to solely Jesus. We're also talking about other prophets.
Okay, so I guess we can just agree to disagree on this so far. But then how would you guys reconcile with the fact that when Joseph released his version of the Bible, he adds in scripture to a lot of books, but then when we find older versions of the same book, they don't contain what Joseph says they should contain.
Joseph never released a Joseph Smith version of the Bible.
Yes, the JST.
Yeah, that was never a full translation. One, it was never finished, and two, it was more of a commentary. He himself never preached from it.
Yeah, but it literally had everything the Bible has plus some.
It would have been considered more of a commentary, and if you can showcase an instance where he himself preached from it, that you may have a point there. But out of all of the historical information that we have, all of the documentation, yeah, and Mosiah in the comments actually has a very good point. He also kept it private.
Well, I would too if I was adding scripture that wasn't accurate.
Well, that's a different point entirely, though. So, like that again is beside the point. Joseph never preached from it.
But can you show any source that says it was just commentary from him?
There are plenty. I mean, you can go to the Joseph Smith papers regarding the Joseph Smith translation and showcase that.
And he says it's just commentary.
That's how he treated it, yeah.
That's two different things. Like, what do you mean by treated it?
You don't have to say something explicitly in order to have it be treated as something. He treated it more as a commentary on what the biblical text of what he had available. He didn't just receive revelation from it. He also was able to try to get Hebrew documents that were available at the time, Greek documents, and were able to, reconcile certain things in there. So, like, for instance, with what it says in the Greek, for instance, in John 20:17, when Jesus says, "Touch me not," he actually changed that because it is more aligned with the Greek to be, "Hold me not."
But didn't he also change what Jesus was? Didn't he say to be from God instead of be God or something like that? I could look up the exact wordage.
I mean, we can go ahead and look up the exact verbiage, but that doesn't change what he taught about Jesus Christ either.
Being that the title page of the Book of Mormon kind of refutes that argument anyway, I think we should probably move on from that part.
Yeah. The title page of the Book of Mormon, which was part of the Nephite Jaredite record, explicitly states that it is for the convincing of the Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God.
See, I feel like it's just a runaround though to what's right in front of our faces.
Okay, so far you're 0 for 2. So what's the next one you have?
Well, I'm not really 0 for 2 though. Like
you are. You haven't brought up
is.
anything that would indicate that it would indicate he lied about his prophetic call. So again, if we are to apply the same standard
to the original script.
Well, and again, do we have the original script? We have no original scripture. We have none of the original texts. In fact, even the Dead Sea Scrolls don't even go back as far as many people would like. It doesn't even go back.
Well, we have thousands of ancient texts from different time periods, and none of them match Joseph's.
Yeah, well, here's the problem.
Medieval times.
Yeah, those are all
Byzantine era.
Yeah, that doesn't matter because again, like all of these different manuscripts say different things too.
Yeah, but they might change like filler words, but they don't change the meaning.
They change
Joseph
a lot.
Smith changes the meaning.
No.
Well, and that goes to my question that I tend to posit is how do you know that an ancient text is divine, absent God, absent divine intervention, absent a presupposition on a previous scripture, and absent physical evidence?
You'll never know for 100%, but you can deduce logically what's most likely to be true and what's not.
Okay, how can you deduce logically that the events of the Exodus actually happened?
Well, let's just say in general, if you have 10,000 copies of one book from different time periods, from different places on the earth, and they all match 99%, you could probably say that it's decently reliable.
Okay, so by that standard, I can look to the Lord of the Rings books that have been published at different times, in different forms, different formats, and then they all ascribe to the author of J.R.R. Tolkien, and so by that standard, I can come to deduce that the Lord of the Rings books are of God.
No, you could see is, there's thousands of copies of Lord of the Rings that say basically the same thing. So the movie and book of Lord of the Rings most likely existed. That's all you could say. That person who wrote that book is probably the real author. That's all you could deduce from that.
Yeah, but what I'm doing is I'm applying that standard. You stated that through multiple copies of the same book, you can come to the conclusion that something is scripture. And so I presented you something that we would both agree is not scripture. By that same standard, it would have to be scripture.
Well, believe what you want, but the Bible warns against this too.
So again, the issue though, again, WTF is applying the same standard to the biblical text that you're trying to apply to Joseph, and you're not.
Okay, this is the point. All right, you guys' religion is to restore the truth, but yet we have thousands of manuscripts that prove ours has not changed really.
It
you
has.
guys have
It
no
has. Because
manuscripts.
WTF, one of your questions before you came up was accusing us of saying that the church fell into apostasy when the Dead Sea Scrolls, you show that the text hasn't changed, but it has. In fact, Elios put one in the comments, going into, for instance, Deuteronomy 32, when it talks about how the tribes were divided. When the Masoretic text says they were divided according to the number of the sons of Israel, the Dead Sea Scrolls said that they were divided according to the number of the sons of God. B'nai Elohim versus B'nai Israel. Very big difference there. That's just one. In fact, you compare that to the Masoretic text of 1st and 2nd Samuel, there are tons of differences there too. There's more than just that one in Deuteronomy. The only one that seems to be even somewhat intact would be the Great Isaiah Scroll. But even then, there are differences in there that should make you raise an eyebrow as far as was this actually perfectly preserved? It's roughly about 98%, but there's a lot more there that, again, would change the meaning of much of the text. So trying to say that the Dead Sea Scrolls affirm scriptural transmission is not accurate at all.
It's just ironic that you guys are saying that something is 98, 99% accurate.
That's just the Great Isaiah Scroll.
No,
there are massive differences.
That's actually, I don't even think that's true. I'm like
that's actually, more charitable.
I know
take,
that Wes Huff made that claim on Joe Rogan, and he was rolled for that. And he actually went online and said, "Oh, I was actually mistaken." Still right in some sense or something, but he was actually admitted that he was wrong. It's just not true. And it's not just orthography or punctuation or any of these sort of minor details that are about grammar or spelling. It's actually different.
Yeah, you've also got the entirety of the documentary hypotheses to contend with too.
But was there more than 4,000 changes like the Book of Mormon in 200 years?
The problem is we don't have any text. We don't have any texts that date back earlier than the 1st century BC.
Well, you guys don't have in the Book of Mormon. There's no manuscripts from before 1800s.
No, because we don't rely on manuscripts to determine scripture.
Then what do you guys rely on?
God.
Their ability to teach and guide people by the Spirit
And what does that mean? Guide them by the Spirit.
Well, no, to teach them in a way. What's the quote from 2 Timothy, guys? Trying to think.
Correction.
Yes.
So you're going to quote the Bible to prove the Bible, but then not use other quotes from the Bible to prove what it says.
We have church father writings that corroborate that the at least the New Testament is authentic. So I don't know what you guys are talking about.
What?
We have church father writings contemporaneous that corroborate that the New Testament that we have today is the same as it was at the time of the apostles.
Corroborating
We're not
what
contending
exactly?
with the authenticity of the New
Wait,
Testament.
hold up. Corroborating what exactly?